let me begin as people are still joining us. And well, welcome everyone. I'm Jeremy Lent, and really happy to welcome you to this month's Deep Transformation Live Network meeting. And here on the Deep Transformation Network, I think I can safely say that pretty much all of us agree that what we need really is a global transformation in our entire world system. But one of the real questions we all have to answer is, where does that transformation begin? And my dear friend, Helena Norberg-Hodge, who's the founder of Local Futures, has been saying for many years, very powerfully, the answer to that question is it begins locally. And there was a great Planet Local Summit that Helena and the other organizers of Local Futures put on just last September, October in Bristol, in the UK last year. And she brought together these really great leading voices, people like Satish Kumar, Bayo Kamalafe, John Perkins, and many others that each of you know, and including our DTN luminary Marek Gamble, who's been a part of DTN right from the outset. And I was honored to be among the speakers where I got to talk about the vision of an ecological civilization, which I was thrilled about. Welcome, Helena. And well, so today, all of us now have the opportunity to interact directly with Helena and also with Nathalie Kelley. Hey there, Nat, who is, so some of you may know her as a celebrity and well-known movie actress. And what is so wonderful about her today in our context here, she's a powerful Indigenous advocate, and we'll be talking about that more. And Nat has actually helped Helena and her team significantly in their leadership in the last few years. And together, they recently launched two important new documentary films that we'll be talking about today and featuring, Closer to Home and The Power of Local. So this is what we'll be exploring today. And our total session is 75 minutes long. We'll have roughly 30 minutes or so right now in discussion right now. Then we'll go into breakout groups and then go back to the main room for the last half hour, where you'll have the chance to ask your own questions directly with Nathalie and Helena. And in the meantime, if you have questions you'd like to ask or comments you'd like to make sure it's shared, but you prefer not to be spotlighted in the second half, feel free to write them in the chat and we'll collect them. And even though I can't guarantee it, I'll try to incorporate some of them in the second half. So just wonderful to have you both here with us today, Helena and Nat. Thank you so much. And Helena's joining us from the UK, close to Schumacher, and not that far from where the Bristol Summit was held last September, October. And Nat is joining us from Lenape territory, otherwise known as New York, if I'm not mistaken. And maybe can I just begin turning to you, Helena. Thank you again for really organizing that incredible summit that took place last September, October. And I wonder if you'd like to just share a little bit about what went into putting that together and what came out of it. And of course, one of the things that we'll explore is the first of these documentaries, which kind of summarizes some of that. So, but you want to just share a little bit of context about that? It was such a major event for so many people.
Yeah, well, I have been promoting a shift away from the global corporate economy towards more localized economies for near 50 years now. And in the process, I and my organization, Local Futures, we've done films, we've done books, and quite a lot of conferences. We found that it was quite a useful way to reach people. So for quite a few years, we organized regional conferences where we brought in a few outside global voices to clarify that all of us on this planet now are dependent on two systems. One of them is a man-made, a patriarchal, top-down, techno-economic system, and the other one is living Mother Gaia. And we really now need to choose clearly between which path into the future we want to support. We want to be more dependent on that artificial system, which is extremely destructive now, or do we want to start finding our way back home? So we've been organizing conferences around that theme with some global voices. And then last year we decided, let's do a really big one. And we had people from every continent, and about 130 some speakers over a very packed program, which for some people wasn't ideal because people wanted to have more time to interact. But we were trying to show just how much is going on around the world. So that was the idea behind that. And from that, luckily, we were able to do interviews, and the films, but the first film, Closer to Home, that you'll see the trailer of, is voices from that Planet Local Summit. Over the years, we've been developing a network, and voices from every continent who are very strengthened by the knowledge that they have to go beyond left and right politics. They have to go really beyond very divisive ideas and politics of identity in order to find a remarkable opportunity to connect, to collaborate for genuine systems change. So we feel very encouraged by the fact that this thinking is growing, but we're also a little bit alarmed by the fact that the push towards AI and a continuation of this techno-economic system is extremely strong. So I hope many of you will have to join this chorus of voices.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you, Helena, for that. That's great. And I really like that you're bringing in the core issues of the whole global context of what we were talking about. And what I'd love to do is turn back to that a little later on in this conversation. It's something that I am always struggling with myself so much, and I know we all are here on the Deep Transformation Network for sure. But I'd love to turn to you, Nat, now too. And in fact, it was at the summit. Personally, it was the first time I got to know anything about your involvement and your work with Local Future. I was so moved by what you talked about, some of your own path to becoming involved with Helena and with all the more like on the ground and indigenous based ways of knowing. And I understand that you, Nat, actually have a Quechua mother and grandmother, and were born in Peru, but then you got raised in Australia. And then I think it was only right when you're about 18, right? You went back to Peru and you began to awaken to this kind of deeper understanding of your own roots and something way beyond in terms of understanding our place in the world. So I'd love you to maybe tell us a little bit more about your path and how that brought you to this place.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you to everyone for joining today. Yes, so I was born in Peru. My mother's family is Quechua. We are Quechua. My grandmother still speaks Quechua. The Quechua are more commonly known as the Incas, but that was the name given to our leader. Much like the pharaoh, the Inca was our leader, and we had about a dozen of them. And during the time that they led the Quechua people, and they grew Tawantinsuyu, the Inca territory. At the peak of this civilization, they were feeding 10 million people without one drop of glyphosate or chemical fertilizer. And they were able to do this because they were master agriculturalists, because they had spent thousands of years evolving a land-based knowledge system that was based on thousands of years of observation of relationships within the natural world. And so they had sophisticated food systems that are still in use today. And it wasn't just the Quechua. All over this continent, Turtle Island or Abya Yala, indigenous people were creating food systems that some of them have lasted 8,000 years and are in continuous use until today. And when you compare that to modern food systems, which have not lasted more than 400, then you really start to get an idea of why it is imperative that we look to pre-colonized societies to learn about how we can grow our food and live in a way that is within our ecological means, and in a way that beyond just being sustainable becomes regenerative. For example, my ancestors in the Amazon created that ecosystem. That was a result of a collaboration between indigenous humans and the natural world to co-create this this biome that ended up becoming where the plants, and wherever the humans touched, the plants and trees found 90% of them were useful to humans. So they were going around bioengineering these parts of the continent and using fire as well. As a lot of people know, fire was used as a regenerative tool to transform the landscape. That happened all across the world, in Australia as well. And then when the Europeans came, these systems sadly were considered primitive and forgotten or brushed aside or purposefully destroyed, because they were replacing it with, this is where Helena's message comes into play, with this global economic system. And this is why Helena's message really resonated with me when I found her a few years ago. As an actress, I have been trying to use my storytelling skills to talk about this problem, although I hadn't properly been able to articulate it until I met Helena. Up until then, I was really just focused on the indigenous food systems piece, but seeing what Helena's doing has given me hope, because the localization movement is the embodiment of, the indigenous, where the indigenous food system was and is going into the future, and something that everybody can get on board with. You don't have to be indigenous. We are all indigenous to some place, in fact. And it's much more of an inclusive movement that leans into and builds on these indigenous values. And so I was really happy to merge my story with hers, and I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about it. This more later. This is just the introduction. But the thing that really landed on me, as you were saying, when I went back to Peru when I was 18 years old, was how come my people who that my mom had spoken to me of for growing up in Australia, that we were master agriculturalists, that we had built these sophisticated food systems. Why were we living in poverty, living in hunger, unable to eat our own ancestral foods like quinoa, because it was more profitable to sell foods like quinoa and acai on the, to an international market, thanks to free trade agreements. And so I could feel the unjust nature of that economic system deep in my bones. And when I met Helena and I had first read her books, but then when I met her, I realized that this was the message that the story that I have been kind of gearing up to tell my whole life. So it's really been an honor to be mentored by her and to learn from her. And I continue to do so. And I hope you enjoy the film that I was really honored to help narrate, which I think we're going to play now.
Yeah, thank you, Nat. That's great. And so many things. I'd love to go deeper in you, just about like the power of agroecology as a different way of working with on our relationship with agriculture, and how colonialism is really has shifted all the way to globalization over hundreds of years. So love to come back to all of these, but maybe now is a good moment to just pause and to share with you, if you haven't yet seen it, just the trailer for that first of those two films that recently got produced. And this one is the closer to home one, which actually takes some of the best sort of fruits, if you will, from that Planet Local Summit and shares it. So I'm going to try to share that with you all right now. And somebody call out if there's a problem with that.
Humanity is at a crossroads. The choice is stark. Either we continue to deny reality and face inevitable ecological and social collapse, or we join the countless numbers of people on every continent who are forging a very different path.
We have to now commit ourselves, no matter who we are, across our diversities, across the world, to another future.
For thousands of years, our cultures were finely tuned to the infinite diversity of the natural world. The way we lived our lives and the stories we told reflected our deep spiritual connections with life around us. Our skills were born of an evolving dialogue with the sun and moon, with water, plants, and animals. Human life in sustainable balance with the rest of creation. But in recent times, we have lost our way. A man-made consumer monoculture has ruptured our sacred connections with Mother Earth, fooling us into believing that we can create something better than life itself.
The result is what we call a death economy, an economic system that's consuming and polluting itself into extinction.
A toxic combination of speed, distance, and scale now threatens the well-being of virtually everyone on the planet.
What if we could turn to our neighborhoods? What if we didn't have to depend on Coca-Cola or some other giant corporate formation in order to have bread or to have drink or to make merry or to meet ourselves for the first time?
Through community initiatives and deeper dialogue globally, a movement is emerging that has the potential to shape the future we want. One in which business and technology serve the needs of the many, rather than the profits of the few. Join us in this worldwide movement. Together we can turn the tide away from the destruction of ourselves and the planet and return home to Earth, to a local future.
Wow. And that is just the trailer. And yeah, just actually watching that film from beginning to end, there's so much wisdom, so many perspectives that really help to weave a whole different picture of what is possible. And maybe let me just turn to you, Helena, and just follow up on what you was just saying a little bit earlier, because I think many of us are in these, at least, and I really speak for myself too right now, like in this kind of two realities that we're living almost every day of our lives. It's so powerful to know what the path is, this kind of going local, this being connected with our human connection. And it's so much what we know speaks to our human heart and who we are. And yet here's this globalized system that seems to be getting more and more out of control. We've got just the rise of AI. We've got this incredible, the most unbelievable inequality in the world, where the richest couple of dozen people in the world own as much wealth as half the human population. And it just gets worse every year. And so along with that then we've seen with political polarization, people who we would think be the ones who would be getting behind what we're talking about, people who have been alienated and dispossessed, lost their jobs, feeling insecure, then they get the fear that they have and the insecurity gets harnessed cynically by these forces of authoritarian polarization, and then it gets turned into hatred for some outgroup. So what do we do? And I so appreciate what you are trying to work with right now, but what I'd love to explore is your sense, with all of the experience you've had in working through trying to offer a different path. How do we get this message to that broader, more sort of like groups of people who haven't yet heard it? And after I hear from you, Helen, I'd love to turn to you, Nat, and ask you about your experiences on that too. But why don't you share with me, Helena, what you have ascertained at this point?
Well, for one thing, I'm absolutely certain that the main problem we have is the blindness of people at the top, whether in government or business, and at the grassroots. So what I've come to see, having spoken to quite a lot of leaders, prime ministers and ministers and
Right.
economists, Nobel Prize winning economists, etc., over these years, is that in order to get into those positions of power, you are signed up to an idea of economic growth. So for government is GDP. GDP measures breakdown. So any card-carrying environmentalist should be willing to join us to say we must have a movement for economic change. But that has happened early on in the beginnings of the modern environmental movement. There were voices like Schumacher, and his books, All is Beautiful, reached a lot of people. But what I witnessed is that what people weren't paying attention to, including Schumacher, what was going on at the international level, at the global level. And at that global level, it turns out really, if we study it, that from the outset, global traders were winning by driving people away from the land and breaking down the community fabric. The human scale interdependence, that is what you found in indigenous cultures, but also even later in more traditional ways of living. So the enclosures and slavery were a foundation, which allowed this enormous power to keep growing as people blindly supported global trade.
Right.
And so we have found that whether at the grassroots or at the top, people have not paid attention to that dimension. Now, if we don't, we end up caught up in a circus of left, right, and some in-betweens that keep promising us that, yes, yes, we do care about your jobs, we do care about your health, we do care about the environment. But when they get elected, they're listening to this, what's become an empire of global corporations and banks. But I just want to stress that the people inside that empire, the people who push to continue to support this path, are a very, very small minority. So we need to be really clear that the issue is that those corporations have been able to capture our avenues of knowledge, television, other forms of media, and science and academia, school books. So then if we can be very clear that our task is an activism of showing the big picture. Now, we're beginning to build that up. Then we have the enormous challenge of how do we break through what is a co-opted, because I should have mentioned the social media, also co-opted by big business.
Right.
So we have to be much more creative. And I believe Natalie and I might differ a little bit on that, because I'm beginning to think that we should all be quite consciously targeting that minority of people who really have time to think about where the world is going. That means actually quite a lot of retired people. It means philanthropists. It means really quite a sort of middle-class privileged group who have the time. And we know, as you know, Jeremy, too, that a relatively small proportion, if of the population, if we can come together, can then have a powerful enough voice to get it out. So that's as I see it. We need to have people much more focused on this, what I call big picture activism. And that would mean you don't have to make your own films. You don't even have to speak, even though it would be wonderful if everyone did, but sharing the materials and seeing this activism of awareness raising as a priority. We also, if I can just add quickly, that we also from the outset have encouraged people to come together at the local level in human scale groups where they deeply connect and start building the lifeboats that are going to be necessary for well-being right now and in the future. So with a focus on local food systems as a very, very high priority, but health and well-being, both physical and mental, are part of a whole wonderful movement towards nature, towards the natural, and towards community. So that those localization lifeboats are essential to strengthen us and to create the foundations of an economy and a culture that we all need.
Yeah,
But the
makes
activism
so much sense.
needs to happen as globally as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And just one more quick thing that it's hard to stop me, but I just want to quickly say that this global building of the movement is not a movement that wants to build a global system. It's a movement that wants to counter the arrogance of one top-down system and create the freedom for cultures and economies to adapt to the infinite diversity of life. And so there's a little bit of a complex issue there that we should maybe discuss.
Yeah, it's another huge issue, and that's why sometimes when I talk about this vision of an ecological civilization, and you Helen, and others have given pushback. What about ecological civilizations or ecological cultures in the plural? Because cultures, because of the fact that each one, it's like to emphasize that each one has its own unique way of being. And at the same time, there is this idea of shifting the entire way in which our globe, our whole world system is organized. So that's another of these tensions between really the global and local. But Nat, I'd love to turn to you on a similar kind of question. Yeah, Helena was saying that you may not see exactly eye to eye with her in terms of how to try to find the leverage points to make the biggest changes. And I'm really curious because you come from a rare place of being a bridge, if you will, between this deep realization of the power of local and of the importance of indigenous ways of knowing and being. And at the same time, you've got this kind of interface with the whole global mass market. You get interviewed in these glossy, medium magazines and all this stuff, and you have a big fan base of including many people who obviously don't have any sense of some of these deeper ways of being in touch with meaning. And so I'm really curious about what insights you have gleaned in terms of how you have tried to sort of translate, one way of making sense of the world into that sort of more sort of the big mass market, if you will, which is what needs to change at some point if this whole system is going to change.
Thank you, Jeremy. And I don't disagree with Helena's approach. I mean, I think it becomes this unsurmountable objective if our goal is to convert everyone, on Earth. And I go back to South America and I see my own indigenous people, and they don't have the time and the space to contemplate these things because they're in survival mode. So I do think it very much will come down to the people with the privilege and the time and the education and the funds like us to sit around and talk about what we're going to do to change this. And we shouldn't put the burden on people who are literally just trying to survive. I find myself in a very interesting position in that like Helena, I'm on this corporate and globalist crusade, but my employer is Amazon. That is, I work for Amazon Prime. I just have to put my hand up and say that's who's paying my bills right now, because like any good monopoly, they don't just sell food. They're now, making TV. And so I have to acknowledge that I am in and a part of the system, and that perhaps there's a way that perhaps there's a reason that I have been planted here to be able to make some change from within. Like the Shambhala warrior prophecy. I don't know if anyone has ever heard Joanna Macy recount this Buddhist prophecy about the Shambhala warriors dismantling the weapons of mass destruction from within the halls of power. So every time I feel very depressed and hypocritical, I think that maybe I'm just a Shambhala warrior. But one of the ways that I'm trying to use this medium in which I work, which is film and television, is showing and not telling, using the power of story to show, not tell. I'm right now in this house and rented this beautiful house in the forest so that I can write my science fiction story, which is a world in which the global economic system is brought to a halt because this AI machine has been hacked. And in order to ensure the survival of life on Earth, it takes out all of modern technology and it brings down the global economic system with it. And the story is set 15 years into the future of this so-called catastrophic event. And while there has been a lot of breakdown and a lot of death and destruction, mostly in the cities, what you find 15 or 20 years after this event is that there has been a renaissance amongst indigenous people and land-based people and people who never forgot their ancestral ways of living and being. And it is my goal to tell this post-apocalyptic story not as a dystopia, but as something close to a utopia, where indigenous people don't have to worry about a corporation cutting down the forest anymore or pouring mercury into their rivers for gold. And it's a movie, actually. I'm just seeing it's a series, is what I'm trying to write. I'm just seeing the comment. And not a book, and so I think using the power of storytelling and using these visual mediums, like narrative, like fiction, movies and series, I think could be very powerful. One of the examples I bring up in my talks, just to show people, because I think when you show and not tell people as well, they have a visceral understanding of what kind of world they'd rather live in. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with what Mexico City looks like today, this sprawling metropolis that is really quite ugly, except in a few touristic places, and full of poverty and crime and smelly and not designed well. And every time there's an earthquake, there's incredible loss of life because it was actually built on top of a lake. And I tell the story of what Mexico City used to look like. And it was El Gran Tenochtitlan. Mexico City is built on a huge lake bed that over millions of years was collecting the sediment that was coming down from the surrounding volcanoes. And so the sediment and soil at the bottom of this lake bed was extremely fertile. And the indigenous people that landed there, the pre-Mexica people, discovered that they could build like what they called floating islands on this lake bed that were agricultural gardens and on which they grew flowers and food. And this was like an ancient Venice where people got around on canoes, picking, harvesting, cultivating. And El Gran Tenochtitlan, the city at the center, could only be accessed by a causeway, and was this fantastically beautiful city in the middle of a lake surrounded by flowers and lilies and hummingbirds. And when the Spanish arrived, they were gobsmacked, because nothing so beautiful or sophisticated existed in Europe at that time. In fact, Europe hadn't even figured out plumbing or sewage systems. But with the genius of the Chinampas, which is the agricultural system that the pre-Mexica had created on this land, was that the human waste would go in and fertilize actually the food that they were growing. So it was this complete circular system. So Hernan Cortés, the conquistador that first laid eyes on it, wrote home and said, I've never seen such a beautiful city, or one that smelt more beautiful in my life. And so when I create this, visual example of like what the world might have looked like had we, instead of coming to conquer and in our arrogance, consider our technologies and our ways of life better, if we had maybe listened to indigenous people about ways in which to live on these lands and live in harmony with the lands and the animals and the waters, our world could look very different. And also not to make the same arrogant mistake of presuming one is necessarily better than other, but like Helena said, let us have a choice. And the diversity of our cultures and our cosmovisions and our ways of being on this land is an act of resistance against this corporate monoculture that is trying to, as Helena says, extinguish all these other cultures and ways of life.
Love it. Wow. Thank you so much, Nat, for sharing all that with you. And I tell you, I can't wait for that series to come out. And I'm so excited about that, because I feel that's exactly what we do need. And this theme of like show, not tell, I think is so important. And in fact, maybe that's a perfect gateway to the trailer for the follow-on film that we both came out similar timeframes very recently, because it's all about that thing. We actually can do this. And it's so empowering to see that. So I'm going to share that trailer now with you again, then we'll come back and close our conversation, get ready for some breakout rooms. So let me share this and find, I think we got it here.
Our economy is not working well for people, places, or the planet. We need a change.
Radically change it so that it's for the benefit of the people and not for the profit of the few.
Helping to strengthen the local economy, supporting our neighbors.
Building a local food economy that supports local food production for everyone.
With the community, for the community.
It's a matter of a whole new approach.
Wow, love it. And I love the way you closed that trailer there. Another world is not only possible, it's already here. And I think that to me is one of the most empowering messages that we can like take in. Because it's not a matter of just kind of hoping or just believing there could be something else, but it's doing the stuff that we know is for real, that we know works. So like what you were saying just a little bit earlier, Nat. So maybe this is the perfect moment, in fact, to maybe go into breakout groups, and like to suggest that we spend 12 minutes in those breakout groups, because I think there's going to be a lot of questions for people want to share with you both once we come back. And what I'd like to invite people to think about and to talk about in the breakout groups is where are the greatest opportunities for regeneration in your own community? So some of you are already working on these kinds of things, and share that with others. Or if you're exploring like what's possible, this is a great thing to be asking yourselves right now. And if, as I've done before, if it's okay with people, I might sort of hover in and out of various breakout groups every now and then, just to get a feeling for what our community as a whole is feeling into and talking about. And so let's do this for 12 minutes. We'll target 4 of us in each group, and then we'll come back, and it'll be opportunity to engage with Helena and with Nat, and ask your own questions and share your own perspectives. Welcome back to our main room. And yeah, I was so inspired by so many different perspectives, just being able to share just a little tidbits of the conversations going on. And now is our chance to share directly with Helena and Nat, if they can both be spotlighted too, so they can be here. And let's turn, I see a lot of questions already up. Let's turn to you, Larry, for the first question. And we're still, I think, waiting for Nat to get spotlighted too.
Okay, well, the wonderful conversation we've had opens up the possibility of generating a multi-framework, which includes tolerance for all these many frameworks. As we started talking about, the commonality in the community is one thing, but there's this problem of Richard Rorty's comment that I always quote, that everybody has a holistic view, and then the problem is they crawl into it. And we need to have a metra framework or worldview, a metra worldview, a metra frame of reference that says, let's be charitable and figure out new frames of reference, because that's how the indigenous people found out and discovered and cooperated for all these thousands of years. You know, the Native Americans in California for 10,000 years managed to get along with all these tribes. So we can do that, but it takes us, we have to go to learn how to deal with diversity of frames of reference. And that's something we haven't really attended to, because we've been so busy saying, well, you have to change it out of this negative, self-destructive death thing that we're in. Well, yes, that's fine, but that just gets us into a polarity of this and that. And we need to go beyond that duality, beyond that polarity, beyond yin and yang, and beyond all these cultural ways, because it's our solutions that we live with.
Yeah,
and
thanks for
that's
that.
where I'm
Really
lost. I'm lost with it, actually. I'm researching it. How do we make these changes? How did people make these changes? But I don't know, and I'm just, it'll take me years to figure it out. I don't know if I will.
And Helena and Nat, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that big question that Larry raises.
Well, I would say, Larry, that what we're finding is that when people in a local community get together to deal with the problems they face in that community, and we're talking about, we're seeing it in smaller towns where the councillors for the local government decide to abandon party politics and just be not Labour or not Democrat and Conservative, but just, we are people for our local community. We've seen remarkable collaboration. We are still too ignorant about the fact that the absolute craziness of our system has to do with being led by abstractions. It would not be possible in any local community for people to agree, we're going to have a measure of progress, which means that if the water is so polluted, we have to buy it in bottles. That is progress. We couldn't agree that progress would mean clear-cutting all the trees on the hill. We couldn't agree that people planting a garden and staying healthy is bad for the community. So the scale is fundamental for us to come back to a sanity in terms of how we use nature and people to essentially provide for our needs.
Als je een barbecue maakt met die kool, hè?
Ja.
Dat is voor een hele avond, hè, wat daar ligt.
So I think someone
is. Wel een keer proberen, hè?
If we could have you muted, we're hearing some background conversation. Thanks. And thanks for that, Helen. And let's bring some more questions and voices into a space. If we can have Ray, if you want to share your questions or thoughts.
Well, this is a big picture view. I apologize for that. I'm looking at big pictures, and evolutionary philosopher Peter Godfrey Smith draws a very poignant three-dimensional graph of Darwinian spaces that show the pitfalls of evolution compared to the best that the evolutionary paradigm has to offer. And on that graph, humanity seems to me to be falling into an error catastrophe, where our cultural mutations are undermining our life support systems. And if such trends continue, then we could cause our own extinction. On the other hand, if we improve our capacities to cultivate and retain good ideas, we can correct our trajectory to steer toward an ideal approach to development. And I see this deep transformation network as a powerful way to understand how to reverse that dangerous process and to go beyond repairing the damage toward taking a responsible and wise role as a good citizen in the biosphere for all of humanity and all of life.
Yeah, thanks for that. Helena,
I hope you worry, Ray, as much as I do, about members of the technocracy who really believe that humanity wasn't good at staying on their evolutionary path, and that now through the technocracy we're going to invent a better way of, you know, evolution, and they see this fusion of humans and technology as evolutionary. So from my point of view, we were on track with evolution as we were multiple cultures adapted to diverse ecosystems. That's how we had this amazing diversity, not only of cultures and languages, even races, to do with adaptation. And as I see, we were pulled off the track of evolution through forceful pressure from elites that then pulled us into the cities and an artificial environment. And it's that artificial environment that is destroying life on Earth and our health. That's how I see it. So partly I would argue that our work is about coming back on track with evolution.
That's a really interesting point, Helena. And I just bring in a question, in fact, from the chat from Vincent Brown. To your point, really a little bit, he says, are the ruling class and decision makers really blind to what the dangers are, or are they deliberately blind, essentially addicted to wealth, power, and status, and wanting themselves to take that power to continue to move us in the wrong direction? I do think that's a key question. And in fact, Nat, I wonder if I could just ask you your direct experience. I mean, you obviously are there interacting with some of these centers of power, of some of these forces, these commercial forces, either driving us in this path. And I'm just curious what you sense of when you've spoken with some of the people who come with the most, you know, from the most center of power and ego and all that stuff. Are they driven by do they kind of know that they're doing something wrong and they doing it anyway, or do they really believe they're doing something right? Or what do you sense when you're interacting in those spaces?
One of the problems with this global corporate monoculture is the dominant narratives that start to take over, that you see become guiding principles of these elites. And they're very much rooted in this patriarchal, individualistic, like Helena says, you know, techno-economic model. So I'm seeing, you know, all these people emerge with hero complexes and these one size fits all kind of solutions that they want to just cut and paste on everybody. And it's really disheartening because sometimes they, you know, their hearts are in the right place, but you can see that they are still on the same programming, you know, continuing along the same thinking that got us here in the first place, which is why I'm really arguing for a diversity of narratives as well, and a diversity of, you know, like we need a new hero's journey as well. Like that has not led us to, you know, that has not always led us to great places. Even in the dominance of the AI narrative that has Helena and myself so worried. And you look at the kind of TV shows and stories that we're seeing where they're trying to get us to subconsciously sign on to this idea that this is part of this human's inevitable, you know, path of evolution that will one day fuse with technology. And I'm seeing it being subtly woven into our culture, and I feel very, very repulsed by that and alarmed by that. And yeah, I'm always trying to you know, offer alternative narratives, but I really think that a big part of this fight is going to be cultural and is going to be trying to push through these other stories into the web of stories, like what Helena has done with her films. And I'm constantly brainstorming about how to get it to land on more people and reach a wider audience, because I worry about, you know, just the power of social media combined with film and television and now virtual reality, and that, you know, the ability to program people en masse and get them to sign on to this one story is very powerful and very worrying, and that we need to think about ways that we can counteract that.
Yeah, so I'm so agree, and I so love your narrative of what you're working on, of an AI that realizes that to really, really help life, what it needs to do is to put an end to this whole global system to begin with. So thanks for working on that. And over to you, Annie.
Oh, good. Okay, well, I always fall back on Barbara Marx Hubbard and the worldview of conscious evolution. I mean, evolution, nature evolves. We are nature. We're part of nature, just like the tree in my background. So, and having volunteered for Red Cross, there are principles, humanitarian principles of universality, neutrality, voluntary service, impartiality, and independence. So if we could think in terms of sharing a worldview that is in alignment with the evolution of nature, which we're part of, I mean, it's really simple. I mean, it's much simpler when we deal with worldview and principles. And I would love to do that with everybody on this call. I'm going to put my email address in the chat, or maybe where my name is now on this. But let's get into principles and worldview, and that will take care of it, because it will expand. We will evolve. We'll have a language. Thank you.
Said, yeah, thanks. And Nat, Helena, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, well, I definitely want to add that I think the key in all of that is, I think the worldview that's emerging is that we now come back to realizing that we are a part of nature. As you say, that tree, and the indigenous people knew that, but now we have to look at the difference between what this Western dominant patriarchal economic system has done to our culture to spread consumerism, urbanization, and the belief that what we create is superior to what nature creates. we need, so I think with the sort of consciousness that you're talking about is a monoculture. It's the not recognizing that for us to adapt like the trees do. Eucalyptus do not thrive in Spain. They thrive in Australia because they're adapted to the different ecosystems. Birches, the birches that we have in Sweden, they can't survive in Australia. So if we really want to learn from the trees and from the diversity of life, we need to learn from the indigenous people who adapted to that diversity and not impose a monoculture. So I say that's the key difference between what we're saying. And we're seeing those cultures as being place-based, and when they change with the change of life. They're in tune with the constant change, with the quantum reality of nature, the infinite change, the infinite diversity. But as we get pushed into cities where a slick of oil and cement separate us, cut us off from the energy of the earth, we are no longer in tune with that nature or with who we really are by nature. That's what I would say.
So right. And I would just add also a comment from the chat from earlier from Roberto Sifo saying exactly pretty much what you're saying, Helen. He said, I feel the key missing ingredient is eco-literacy. Like if decision makers and people all around really understood the way that life works, what a difference that would make. So thank you for that. And to you, Lloyd, welcome.
Thank you. Helena, I've loved the documentaries. I saw both of them. And I read your book several years ago, and that was certainly an eye-opener for me, seeing how modern development creates third world poverty. And one of the things I've learned from indigenous peoples is their legend of the Wetiko. And Wetiko is a cannibalistic spirit. It's a soul sickness. And they hadn't encountered it except in rare individuals until the Europeans arrived here and they saw an entire culture. And I think we fail to identify the absolute pathological sickness of Wedico that underlies all of our institutions. And Wedico is a cannibalistic monster that devours everything it touches in its striving after material possessions, after status, after power. And all of the native peoples that I know stress that healing has to be a part of anything we do going forward, that it is not a purely rationalistic approach that we can take.
Yeah.
Well,
I'll jump in.
Yeah, go
I want to
ahead.
jump in. Yeah, thank you for bringing up Wedico. Wedico is actually the villain of my story. But we come to see that it's not any one person, but like you said, this pathological sickness that has infected a huge part of the human race. And you're right, a big part of this is going to be about healing that. And I think one of the things that we have to think about is that what drives our consumer-based culture. A lot of it is driven from a lack of spirituality and a disconnection to the land because of the diaspora, because so many of us are no longer living on the lands of our ancestors, and we've been disconnected from our ancestral ways, from our relationships to our deities, our song lines, etc., etc. And so what fills the void? They tell us that consumerism does. And, you know, this is not, when you go to COP, etc., you're not hearing panels on spirituality, on like reconnecting to spirit and source, but this is actually at the very heart of what we need to do. And it's such a shame that spirit has been so separated from these conversations. And, we've made climate this big boogeyman, but, the climate's just doing what the climate does. It's responding to our lack of tending to the land and the waters. And so when we can heal this on a spiritual level, then we won't even have to have all these talks about globalization, et cetera, because those systems would no longer make sense. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons that the Inca were able to feed 10 million people and create whole new species. Corn is an indigenous invention, for example. One of the reasons they were able to create so much biodiversity, so many thousands of varieties within species, and trade so much food across huge distances of land is because they never once thought about selling food. It was so sacrilegious to see food as a commodity. Food and water are sacred. And so once we can reclaim these things as sacred, then we no longer have to think of, the free market is an inconceivable idea. But yeah, I'm dreaming of a world way into the future. I may not live to see that world, and we can reconnect in that way.
No.
I hold that in my heart.
Thank you for sharing that vision. And that's what, some of us are calling this notion of an ecological civilization, this out there into the future, but something that can pull us into the direction we need to go. So I'm looking at the time, we're close to our 75 minutes, and thank you for spotlighting the three people with their hands up. What I'd like to do, maybe just to try to get everyone's voice in right now, if it's okay with you, Helena and Nat, is let me ask each of you, Sigurd, Shando, and Jaya, to just make your statement or ask a question. Try to keep it fairly concise because of our timing, so that we can have all of your voices into the field, and then ask Helena and Nat to just respond to what you want to share. So maybe begin with you, Sigurd.
Yeah, so I like to dig down to roots, and I think the first level going down closely aligns with thinking about Wetiko. And I got this distinction from Rianne Eisler about two different ways that power are used, in domination or in partnership. And this just runs deep through what we're talking about today. Because domination is that Wetiko. And that partnership is what's necessary for local cultures with an S to exist and thrive. But then there's a deeper level to that, which is that each human being needs to have a sense of what it means to be safe and connected. You really feel that at the core in the moments, every moment of life. And we don't have that in this culture. People don't recognize that that is a possibility. So that's the deeper need, and to find ways to bring that to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Sigurd. Yeah, and Shando and Jaya. Shando, you want to speak?
Oh, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I wanted to ask Helena and Nat. I work in helping communities start up and develop themselves. It's just right at the start. I'm thinking of it as village whispering. I'm kind of see a role as that. I'm really interested, and I use what I call common bonds, the principle of the common bond, the social glue of the community, what it is that holds people together. And I have found that by inviting that out into the open, that's a really wonderful and enjoyable thing for the people. And I feel that's a really important thing. So there's that strand. And I also use play in my work. And have you used, in the local futures, have you used play at all? I'd be interested to have a conversation about that. I've got, game structures and things like that. And the other strand, just quickly, is I'd like to say that the word religion, the root word of that is religio, which is the Latin root word. And what that means is how I am connected or bound together in a bundle. And I feel, that's the start of the sacred thread that we need in the middle. Thank you.
Beautifully. Thank you for bringing all those threads in towards the end, Shanda. A whole hour conversation could come from all those things you brought in. And let me turn to you, Jaya, for what you'd like to ask or reflect on, and then back to you, Helena and Nat. Yeah.
Yeah, first we need a transformation, and because we have most of the population, world population, lives in very dense cities, or so I say this every time. So if you put away the techniques and all this, you don't have a computer anymore. You wouldn't sit there. You wouldn't have a telephone. You wouldn't have water anymore, or food even not, and not a car running, not a tram running, nothing. And then you should survive or fight against to take out 2 billion tons of greenhouse gases, and to pull all the plastic out of the oceans, and to restore ecological system in high speed. This is then not possible anymore. And so we need the industrial base, and we need them to transform. So how can they change from their character, that they don't have to destroy the planet, but to help to keep the world civilization stable on the essential production and supply structure, but also to save the planet. Yeah, and how can they change from their character? And this is, now is the question: what do you think about it? We don't need a monetary system anymore. We can transform with a pure network system, without any monetary means. It's not a monetary system. A network system is a new organizational instrument for the world. And this, all the big and the small companies wouldn't be in competition. They wouldn't have to generate finances anymore. And then they can integrate in the world salvation. So how do you think about this fact?
Thank you for that, Jaya. And I'll just add, there was a question asked earlier by Ben Levy in the chat, similar to what you were saying about what would happen if the whole global economic system came to a halt. There'd be this drastic death and supply chains disappearing, etc. So big questions, and I know we're towards the end of the time, so sorry to put this on you, Helena. Now,
I want to hear Helena answer this question. I'm asking them too.
Some of these answers. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank Sylvia Holland for such an excellent note-taking job. Thank you. So quick and so clear. It looks like you've studied our work because you seem to know exactly what we're saying. Thank you very, very much. Yeah, so quite a lot there to unpack, and particularly, the last is difficult. I mean, maybe come to the earlier points. Yes, absolutely. Connection is what it's all about, and that is fundamentally what religion was meant to be doing, was this connecting sense of the oneness of life. Love was the essentially in almost all religions and spiritual traditions, the understanding of the inextricable oneness, and that love is the way, love is that connecting path. We have colleagues who then talk about the choice that was made when we were pulled away from the land, don't forget, forcefully. That was a path that engendered more and more fear of nature, fear of the other, and it's built now really with the help of algorithms on a path of war in the social media and in the real world. The war machine is very lucrative in this global extractive system. So Jaya, in terms of what you were saying, yes, we absolutely need technologies. We're not talking about, in our critique of technology, having no technology, nor are we at all advocating for doing away with any of these fundamental technologies very rapidly. And that, for me, would include money. Money is a technology. I don't think that suddenly removing the money system is going to solve our needs. I think that could only be possible through even greater reliance on surveillance technologies that are very centralizing. I think once we understand, from my point of view, the need to adapt to nature, we want to start on a path of decentralization. In order to get there, it would be in nobody's interest to suddenly shut down the global economy overnight. It's not even possible. What is possible is that we build up a movement where people truly understand that being ruled by invisible flows of money that are guided by algorithms and now by AI, that system, born of this separation, continuing to separate the war machine, is not compatible with life. It's not compatible with health. It is absolutely not compatible with any sort of democracy. So we need to come together as a global movement with a very strong voice about pushing the pause button on further handover of power from government to corporation, on further expansion into AI, very speedy technological systems, which, as I say in the film, Nat says, but it's my script, it's a toxic combination of speed, scale. In other words, the distances prevent people from seeing their impact on the other side of the world. You can sit in New York and invest in what you think is a good plantation, and what's being bunged up on the other side of the world is a completely unnatural monoculture that becomes completely useless and destructive. Monoculture is really the enemy of life. And this system has been involved in pushing both biological and human monoculture. So we're not at all talking about the way forward being a sudden shutdown of the technologies on which we are so dependent right now. But we are talking about, let's come together to be clear, we don't want to create further dependence. We don't want to go to 5G. We don't need 5G because we will know that 5G is going to help that financial casino and the war machine far more than it can help us. So we want to urge a pause, then we want to have an honest look. This can only happen if we're now talking about people's movements demanding from government that they sit at the table and they will work out the steps that need to be taken to start taking control of Wetico. Wetico is a monster that is essentially this techno-economic juggernaut. That is Wetico. And Wetico has pushed a worldview which is narrow, reductionist, which prevents us from understanding that we're all connected. So I think the path forward is this global movement that links people concerned with ecology, well, every form of environmental issue, every form of social concern, democracy, women's rights, everything we care about is being either the problems are being created by this techno-wetico or exacerbated. So we all have a reason to link voices for the transformation that will bring things back to a level where we can start dealing with them in a way that does not impose a monoculture. I hope that makes sense. That it's
Yes.
about recognizing that the choice is either global government controlling this global empire of banks and corporations, and please don't fantasize about that, because we already see that bigger nations make the voter feel so disempowered that in the long run, we want even political decentralization, but it needs to start with this economic breakup where democracy determines the shape of business. Please keep in mind, Jaya, that right now, the environmental agencies, the agencies that are meant to be protecting our environment and our health, are being funded by the businesses that they're meant to be regulating above all. But instead, they end up regulating small farmers, small independent businesses, destroying viable, independent, small businesses that can do a wonderful job. This is not about turning everything over into some kind of top-down socialist structure. No, it's about allowing for genuine entrepreneurship, genuine, real possibilities for some people to work harder and earn a bit more, and other people maybe to choose less work and a little bit less income. We do not have to do away with money. We do not have to do away with technology, but we do need an understanding of what's happening, and we do need some kind of democratic process. And I would urge everyone to look at scale in terms of creating the units of connection. Sigurd earlier on was talking about how important, and someone else earlier about healing. And we are seeing healing that is emerging as people connect deeply to each other in circle, being able to be vulnerable, being able to explain that they are not perfect. They might have a problem with alcohol. They might be arguing with their husband. They might have whatever. We're all human. We're all imperfect. But we've been forced into a shell where we're not allowed to be real. We're not allowed to be imperfect. And breaking that shell so that we know that we have love and support and respect as we are, not as something we pretend to be. That's one of the key paths towards healing, and it's happening through local, face-to-face, human-scale interaction. And the healing that comes by reconnecting with animals, with plants, with water, with soil is magic. And one very quick last thing I want to say, please don't anyone feel hypocritical if you're not living that perfect life of local connected, if you're working for Netflix or you're working for something else that isn't creating war, because we're all engaged now in supporting war in one way or another with our taxes. This is not about being the perfect local what. I am totally practicing what I preach. I am not pretending to be a nice, wonderful local economy. I can't. I'm trying to urge people to raise awareness so we come together and create what we all want. We all want the same thing. Every child needs that love and connection. We all want a healthier environment. We want cleaner water, and we want meaningful work. And there's so much meaningful work out there now to restore the health of the planet. But we're trapped in a system where our labor is too expensive because our governments are subsidizing energy and resources. So these basic economic truths are very, very important. It's not about creating an economy, it's about creating a thriving culture, and actually many thriving cultures. Thank you very much. I'm sorry if I went on too long.
Beautifully
I'm thrilled to
summarized
be
there.
working with
Thank you so
Nathalie.
much, Helena.
On to hear the words from
And,
Nathalie.
Yeah, let's turn to Nat for any last final words you want to share with us.
Just deep gratitude to be here and to have had the chance to also learn from you. I've been taking notes from everybody as well, so it's felt like a very nourishing and very reciprocal time together. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you to you both for your wisdom and perspective and insights. And I feel like we've covered so much. There's so much depth and so much heartfelt sharing today. It's really, really so meaningful. And want to just remind everyone, if you want to just kind of go further into the, on Thursday, we have a circle of practice. a follow-on really to this, where we'll be sharing more from a quieter heart-centered space. And that begins at 11:30 a.m. Pacific on Thursday the 8th. I just put the link to RSVP to that in the chat. And if you can, if you haven't yet done so, watch those 2 films between now and Thursday, so you can come with those films really in your heart and spirit to be able to share. And I'll put up the recording of this later on the DTN, and also links to the films there, so it'll be easy to access, as well as the chat. Dear thanks to you, Helena and Nat. What a rich and deeply meaningful conversation it's felt like today.
And Jeremy, again, just want to say how much I appreciate your collaborative, kind, compassionate, wise leadership. So much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. I look forward to connecting more in the future here on the DTM. Bye.